Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Venetia, and I will be your host for today's episode of Dough Deconstruction, a series wherein I will be taking a closer look at each episode of Cookie Run Kingdom's continents. Today's subject matter shall focus on the Garden of Sweet Delights, a mysterious part of Beast Yeast where happiness seems to overflow from every crack of a smile and in every strum of a harp. We'll be dividing the analysis into three main chapters: retelling, design analysis, and character interaction analysis. Without further ado, grab your harps and soul jams because this one will be one insolent voyage. The entire thing starts with a prologue telling us about the events of the previous Beast Yeast episodes, with Mystic Flower messing up the entire Cacao Kingdom, Burning Spice ripping Golden Cheese wings, and Shadow Milk being a goofy little simp towards Pure Vanilla. Oh well, I'll summarize those other episodes on a different video, so for now, let's avert our gaze towards a determined Raspberry Cookie who mentioned that she's bound to leave for an expedition of sorts. Later on, it was revealed that she was actually going to hop around and help Hollyberry with her travels in Beast Yeast, as the latter was really adamant with the idea of facing her beast counterpart head-on by more or less hunting her down in Beast Yeast. Hollyberry's envoy bashes monsters around, and they were more or less surrounded by hundreds of beasts, which led to some of their soldiers being wounded. Hollyberry slays one of the big boys, and Pavlova then shows up out of nowhere and starts guilt-tripping Hollyberry and telling her that she just killed two lovers. Honestly, at that point, I'd properly punch that flying insect out of their existence. Pavlova then proceeds to diagnose everyone in their group chat with his love diagnosis and invites Hollyberry's expedition team to come rest inside the Garden of Sweet Delights. And by invite, I mean spreading a hypnotic gas which eventually transports everyone inside of Eternal Sugar's domain, which is basically cookie napping. Upon their arrival, the envoy gets warmly welcomed by the residents in the garden, and Hollyberry even gets offered some booze, much to the dismay of Wildberry and Raspberry Cookie. Hollyberry then gets extremely lax with the whole endeavor and eventually visits the bringer of happiness during nighttime. They had a short bonding moment, which then led to Hollyberry letting her guard down and most likely being brought under the influence of Eternal Sugar, an incident which Tiger Lily takes note of, telling Hollyberry that she's emitting quite the sweet smell. This most likely means that she's now psychologically altered or manipulated in a way. Fast forward to the next day, they prepare themselves to step foot outside of the garden once more, but now the soldiers themselves are way too relaxed and would want to prolong their stay inside the garden. To put it simply, they're just procrastinating on everything now. Sounds like me a day before my chem final. But of course, Pavlova Cookie would try to prevent Hollyberry's team from leaving the garden, which then results in Hollyberry throwing her shield at him. That's not a speculation, by the way. I can 100% attest to this. After all, my dad works for Dev Sisters, trust me guys. Anyway, Eternal Sugar sees this chaos happening and gets upset, letting Hollyberry's team go whilst telling Pavlova that he needs some re-education. I didn't know Eternal Sugar was a tiger mom, but oh well, who am I anyway? Pavlova gets pissed off and passes off his duty of, showing them the way out to Sugarfly Cookie, and we get a small cutscene between Pavlova and Eternal Sugar. In this scene, Eternal Sugar states the following:
Pavlova Cookie, won't you come closer to me?
Yes? You called for me?
What is happiness? Happiness is like a butterfly. I try to catch it, but it escapes from my hand. But I will never let that happen to my precious cookies of the garden.
Thanks to you, everyone is happy here.
How sweet of you. Oh, little Pavlova Cookie, let us live in the Garden of Delights forevermore, basking in happiness eternal.
Uh-huh.
We then get the first hint that Pavlova Cookie doesn't really want to stay in the garden, as he shows hesitation with the entire endeavor. The more that this plays out, the more I believe that Pavlova is Eros and Eternal Sugar is Aphrodite, but then again, we'll save that thought for later. We cut back to Hollyberry's squad, who isn't really doing that too hot, as they were getting overpowered by the beasts, with the majority of her soldiers getting slashed left and right. Curiously enough, most of these monsters were after sugar, Holly Berry herself, which does make sense as Tiger Lily did mention that Holly Berry smelled particularly too sweet. Eventually, Wildberry Cookie makes a sacrifice to save Holly Berry, which eventually led to her suffering from a deep wound and forcing the entire crew to go back into Eternal Sugar's garden. At this point in the story, all I'm getting reminded of is that one Hotel Transylvania scene where, Mavis goes to a normal human town under the guise of exploration, only to find out that the quote-unquote humans in the town were raising their pitchforks against her and were ready to burn her, so to speak. This was of course all part of her father's plan, as Dracula wants his daughter to stay with him forever, and the entire traumatic experience was a ruse to make her see that the outside world is just as dangerous. Anyway, I'm getting very distracted, so let's get back on Wildberry's broken fist. Holly Berry carries her to the Garden of Sweet Delights as her other soldiers get treated, and Pavlova mentions that only Eternal Sugar can help her and her friends. Pavlova then leads her to Eternal Sugar's meditation corner and strictly tells Holly Berry that she can only see her if and only if she seeks happiness. We then cut to a flashback where Holly Berry's protecting a farm. This is where she gets a makeshift shield and realizes that her life's greatest joy is defending other cookies, even at the cost of her own expense. Eventually, Eternal Sugar finds her and mends Wildberry's wounds, then offers to take away all of Holly Berry Cookie's pains beyond the physical. Another flashback then occurs where a majority of the Holly Berry kingdom keeps getting cooked and toasted, so to speak, which eventually led to Holly Berry pursuing adventures in Beast Yeast as she saw herself unfit to rule the kingdom within the confines of a castle. From these flashbacks, we can already tell that she's greatly resenting her own actions, blaming herself for the loss, and even ignoring her own son by burying her resentments in alcohol. Eternal Sugar makes note of this weakness and does a therapist thing, psychoanalyzing Holly Berry deeply with the reveal that she's a beast cookie and then telling her that she doesn't want to take away her soul gem, nor does she want to fight her. Interestingly enough, Eternal Sugar mentions that she doesn't want to take Holly Berry's soul gem by force. Well, this just tells me that she wants to take it through other means, so that's a little nice detail I'd like to take note of. Eventually, Eternal Sugar reveals her secret through her memories, and through this, we are shown that her ideals of happiness is through the lens of hedonism and emotional manipulation. By giving the cookies a false sense of comfort, she makes them emotionally reliant on her, which, upon choosing to leave the garden, leads to her quote-unquote blessing them with a sweet scent, which leads to monsters attacking them and the cookie being forced to stay within Eternal Sugar's garden forever. Holly Berry realizes her blatant manipulation, calls out for it, and eventually blames her for Wildberry's affliction. Eternal Sugar tells her that her source of pain is her shield, and she wants to remove it from her, contrary to the Light of Passion's instructions. Pavlova Cookie eventually shoots the shield down, which breaks it as per the instructions of Eternal Sugar, and Eternal Sugar's jewelry box closes in on Holly Berry, locking her in for the next episode. Without a doubt, the Garden of Sweet Delights is heavily inspired by a triptych, or a 3-paneled oil painting made by Hieronymus Bosch, between 1490 and 1510, titled The Garden of Earthly Delights. Sounds familiar. Scholars interpret this 3-paneled masterpiece as a warning to temptation, as the panels went as follows: the Garden of Eden in the leftmost side, what I assume would be the present in the middle, and Judgment Day or destruction in the last part of the art. As for the exterior of the painting, one can see a see-through sphere thought to represent the Earth upon the third day of its creation, which, oddly enough, appears to be quite similar to the orb that Eternal Sugar is seen cradling in multiple cutscenes. In the context of Beast Yeast Episode 9, the centerpiece of the artwork could be alluded to as a symbolism for the concept of temptation. Just like how Eternal Sugar strives to fulfill the happiness of all cookie kind within her utopia, the Garden of Earthly Delights, or GED for short, showcases the several hedonistic acts performed by humanity after we got cast away from the Garden of Eden. This does make sense, as Eternal Sugar's whole shtick was to become a constant temptation for Holly Berry and everyone else. In her case, she offered rest and medical attention to the weary and wounded Holly Berry soldiers. Another thing I'd like to point out is that the GED is populated to the brim with bizarre-looking shapes and structures, almost synonymous to that of the bizarre-looking flora flourishing within Eternal Sugar's garden. I do want to note that the GED is not in any way Eden. Instead, it is a consequence, an aftermath of humanity's fate as it strayed away from the Creator's divine presence. Which, now that I think about it, would make sense why Eternal Sugar and Shadow Milk Cookie have somewhat close ties to one another. If Shadow Milk Cookie is the snake of deception and Eternal Sugar just might be the snake of temptation, which works quite well for me in the context of Eden, as you can really only be deceived if you are tempted with the idea of something. The thing that stands out the most to me in the centerpiece within the GED is how similar it is with the meshing together of flesh and fruit to how Eternal Sugar's paradise has several fusions between body parts and sweets. From just a quick glance at the level's design, you can clearly see the use of three main body parts: the teeth, the eyes, and the heart. At first glance, you can already tell that this is a type of candy gore, wherein one would swap in the candy version of real organs. This is actually quite prevalent, as I had vivid recollections of young little me munching on some gummy teeth and gummy hearts after a Halloween trick-or-treating session. Anyway, you might be wondering what this could potentially mean. From this alone, and basing it off of my interpretation, it could possibly mean a prohibition on those three main organs. If you think about it, the teeth can be linked to speech, the heart for emotion, and the eyes to one's perception of reality. Perhaps the reason for their prevalent imagery in the garden was that they were the three main things you quote-unquote lose and give up to the bringer of happiness the moment you choose to succumb to the effects of her sloth. Let's put the Hollyberry soldiers as an example. Before stepping foot onto the garden, they were suspicious, adamant, and frankly had a semblance of rational thought up there in their noggin. Yet, the moment they inhaled some of the sweet fumes and got transported into the garden, they overindulged to the point of being too relaxed and desiring not to proceed with their perilous adventures. They indulged their gluttony and gave up their so-called teeth, which usually had connotations to consumption and speech, indulged their desires and gave up their so-called heart to Eternal Sugar, which inhibited all of their emotions to be replaced with only a fabricated sense of joy, and gave up their so-called eyes, which clouded their perception of reality and rational thought, thus making them want to stay within the garden of sweet delights. Also, I'd like to point out how each beast's initial episode relates to a type of horror. Burning Spice had violence and annihilation as its main thing, Mystic Flower had existential horror, Shadow Milk had psychological horror, and Eternal Sugar was most likely a reference to body horror replaced by candy gore. It's quite telling how every inch of this paradise was littered with both sweets and jam. As we all know, jam in the Cookie Run universe was the cookie's version of blood. To see it scattered all throughout the design stage is probably an ominous foretelling of things to come. Actually, the entire paradise is the definition of something that is too good to be true. And from the get-go, you can definitely tell that something is wrong with the place. Again, this reinforces the entire Lotus Eater concept I have stated from my previous video, where they basically become lazy after eating a lotus. But in our paradise's case, they were just really charmed by it all. Before we continue onward, please do consider subscribing and liking. It really helps with the channel, and hey, you can always unsubscribe later. Unlike Eternal Sugar, I won't keep you stuck in my garden. Now, I'm not a psychologist of sorts, but I can definitely decipher some of the characters' intents and interactions within this episode. For us to carry this out, we have to first identify our main targets for this sort of analysis. We will limit ourselves to three main targets: Pavlova, Eternal Sugar, and Hollyberry Cookie. Pavlova's initial appearance when he made himself known to the gang suggests that he's the type of cookie to tease people around. Albeit, he means well and he seems to be motivated with the desire to bring love to every cookie in Earthred, he certainly had a dramatic sort of flair to the point of partially guilt-tripping our dear old Hollyberry, even stating that her crew had slain 2 beast lovers, which like... I don't care. Based on this alone, I can already conclude without a shadow of a doubt that Pavlova is a personification of love, the son of Aphrodite, Eros. Within the Greek mythos, Eros is usually presented as a handsome young man, although some depictions do portray him as a silly, mischievous little goober, which definitely fits our boy Pavlova over here. A constant piece of his design revolves around his signature bow and arrow, used to make everyone he shoots with it to fall in love. As the usual catalyst of the blossom of love between two mortals or immortals, Eros is usually seen with her mother Aphrodite, the goddess of love, which, if we were to assume that Pavlova is Eros, well, that would just mean that Aphrodite is most definitely personified as eternal sugar and that my predictions were definitely correct. This ultimately makes sense, as for the entire episode, Pavlova can be seen as a loyal follower of eternal sugar, seeking only to fill in every cookie's hearts with love. Except for one instance, when Pavlova Cookie snaps at Hollyberry for her desire to leave the garden, gets scolded by Eternal Sugar, and eventually gets re-educated by Eternal Sugar herself.
Oh, little Pavlova Cookie, let us live in the garden of delights forevermore, basking in happiness eternal.
Uh-huh.
There. That exact instance of hesitation hints to us that Pavlova obviously does not want to stay in Eternal Sugar's domain. Given that Pavlova is the personification of love itself, it can be an allegory to how love wishes to escape within the grip of Eternal Sugar herself. The question still remains, why? From what we've already seen, Pavlova Cookie is not acting out of the interest of Hollyberry's own good. He's even willing to lock Hollyberry's crew up in paradise if needed, even if he knew back then what Eternal Sugar would do. So, what could be his potential motivation for all of this? Well, I have a few ideas. One, it could be that he is duty-bound. After all, it is possible to obey someone without having the desire nor true obedience to do so. It is definitely possible that there was a sort of contract or obligation that Pavlova Cookie was bound to fulfill, perhaps in exchange for the protection of his most cherished, or something else entirely. It could also be that he simply wishes to get away from Eternal Sugar as their goals no longer align, given that he is the bringer of love and she of happiness. Either way, he wants to get out, but he can't, and honestly, yeah, good for him. I want him locked up, because if I see him outside of the garden, I will personally see to it that he becomes Caesar salad. Now, for Eternal Sugar's existence, things start to get really interesting. We don't really know much about her from the beginning, as she was usually referred to as the bringer of happiness. But if we were to suspend our hindsights and future vision for a moment, we'd never really suspect a huge quantity of suspicion on her, as she seemed relatively fine. She healed the Hollyberry soldiers, offered to play the lyre for Hollyberry Cookie, along with her seemingly taking good care of Hollyberry and those that she holds dearest. From an outsider perspective, she seemed relatively harmless in the beginning, albeit her obsessive behavior was the root cause of why Wildberry was greatly wounded in the first place. Now, this is purely manipulative in nature. The entire thing really felt suspicious, and from the looks of things, Eternal Sugar really seemed like she wanted to string Hollyberry along on a leash like a dog. This is further solidified by Eternal Sugar blatantly pointing out all of Hollyberry's flaws afterward, which is a step towards a cycle of love bombing and devaluation. First, Eternal Sugar showers Hollyberry Cookie with affection and care, but eventually brings up all of her flaws and breaks down her character so that Hollyberry would be completely emotionally dependent on her. Seeing that Hollyberry is already ridden with insurmountable quantities of guilt, either as a result of her actions or her being unable to manage her emotions, she was a very easy target for Eternal Sugar's manipulation, which probably explains what Pavlova Cookie was referring to when he said that Hollyberry's heart was hollow. Anyway, that's all of my analysis for the 9th episode of Beast Yeast. I will make one concerning the 10th episode after this one, just, let me cook it on time. Oh well, thanks for watching, and be a member of my channel if you want to support me. That's it. Toodaloo!